Well, he showed up in Kyoto with a sword at his side, oh, or some armor like a ronin, but he didn't have a daimyō. Every scholar squints and grumbles that bio's looking shady, oh. Now the archives got a hole they can't deny. Where in the world is this black guy samurai? They checked Edo, checked Osaka, even climbed Mount Fuji high. Where in the world is this black guy samurai? They flipped pip scrolls in Nagasaki, found no clan that took him in, no man, no bad, no lineage, can't find where he's ever been. But Ubisoft dropped trailers, now the temples are in sin, and the ministry's confused and asking why. Where in the world is this black guy samurai? Not in Nara, not in Kobe, not in any family tie. Where in the world is this black guy samurai?
He's back with auto dub this time. Remember Takeshi Nagase, the man from Hyogo Prefecture? Well, he's here to tell us all about what's going on with the Assassin's Creed Shadows discussion going on still with the Japanese government. You thought this was over because the game came out? No, 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 my friend. No, 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 no. The Japanese are still very angry about what went on in that game and what continues to go on in that game unchanged. And so here is Takeshi to explain just exactly what's going on his end. Now, I moved this ahead to where he's talking about Yasuke. He goes through some introduction at the beginning. I'll put a link to the full video down below. You could take a look at it for yourself if you want to hear what he's got going on at the beginning of the video. Again, it's just introduction stuff, but if you're a completionist, the link will be there for you.
First of all, the protagonist Yasuke is still depicted as a black
Yasuke, because, we're going to have some problems with auto dubbing, okay? So we'll take that from the top, okay? What a great face to pause on.
First of all, the protagonist Yasuke is still depicted as a black man. The game screen shows the source in Japanese as a historical verification result, and according to the Matsuda family chronology, Yasuke was not a tentacle or a mercenary, but a
All right, so I'm gonna have to explain a little bit of like Google Translate goofiness that happened here. They are not saying that Yasuke is a tentacle, the tentacle, the kind that goes after schoolgirls. They're not talking about that. Instead, he's talking about a subordinate, and those two words apparently run a little too close together for the auto dub to understand. Now, when he's talking about Matsuda is a imperial historian. This is a person that is respected across there. I think his name is Kiichi. I think that's how you spell it. It's Kichii. Two I's, sorry, not three. And I think his name is Kiichi Matsuda. I think that's how you pronounce that. I could have that wrong. But this gentleman has done extensive research into the imperial family and confessed that there's nothing in there that talks about Yasuke. And you'll hear that here.
samurai who had a connection with Nobunaga. This is a representation that makes it seem as if it is a historical fact, while taking a certain amount of insurance. However, when you actually look at the family record, this historian actually does not write anything like that.
Correct. Matsuda did not record anything to do with Yasuke.
This is a very malicious move, as mercenaries, beggars, and dogs are probably the same people who receive complaints.
So when he's talking about this, he's talking about how people of low standard would be recorded through sort of an observational history, and he's comparing this to like people of low standard because again in Japan these are very they're not as blurred as they are here in the West. In Japan these are very defined lines of behavior, attitude, and class. And so when he's explaining this stuff, particularly for the era of Nobunaga, what he's explaining is that Yasuke is recorded in history like the same way they would record a mercenary, a troublesome person like a dog, or a beggar who was of a at least some standard, either being a nuisance or being a reason to record them in history as someone as a beggar rather than someone who overcame their begging. What I'm trying to clear up is that he's not referring to Yasuke in a positive manner. Okay, he's not. When Takeshi is mentioning this, he is comparing Yasuke's historical record to someone of low standard. Okay, that's what I'm trying to explain.
Historians say that this is tantamount to fabrication, and that they have no choice but to say so.
Yeah, well, what are you gonna do? It's a lie.
Furthermore, regarding the Asagori issue, since
So again, because Google Translate is oh so awesome, when they say asaguri, they are not talking about a tree. I got confused about this for a long time because of the Google Readout Translate, because he was using that. But when I was finally doing like the Chat GPT breakdown of like what could this mean, because I was like, why do they keep talking about trees? What do trees have to do with this? And so I went out and I talked to Chat GPT about this, and of course they came back and Chat GPT came back and said, by the way, they're probably saying Assassin's Creed, but because of the way Japanese blends together English pronunciation and Japanese pronunciation, the Asaguri is not meant to be a tree. It is meant to be Assassin's Creed, but because of the pronunciation, either be because it's regional or just simply because of how Japanese and English kind of marry each other inadvertently for, short-term explanation, like shorthand explanations. This is why you keep hearing people bring up Asaguri trees when they're talking about Assassin's Creed.
we are from Hyogo Prefecture, we have visited Ida's shrine in Himeji and have reported on Ida's shrine for some time, but to a certain extent, the blasphemous acts have been corrected, and it is no longer possible to cut the Aikodo's samurai with a sword.
Okay, so to be clear, he's talking about the shrines and that there is an update that has come through, of course, as we know. Ubisoft has changed the environmental dynamics of the shrine. You cannot destroy the sacred mirror and a couple of other sacred objects that are escaping my mind. However, the shrine itself is still, pregnable to going in without proper reverence and things like that. You can go in there fully dressed in your armor with your sword out and all that stuff, freshly covered in blood, even. It doesn't bother the game, it doesn't desync you. And you are no longer allowed to, I believe, harm the priests, meaning you can't kill them, you can't that kind of stuff. Of course, unless they're characters that involve that kind of action being, exercised upon them. So this is just, again, I'm trying to clarify so that we understand that Ubisoft, feeling the pressure, decided to react and now has kind of dropped back. And we'll get into why in just a little bit. These sales numbers are horrific. We finally have them. Right.
However, there are still many scenes that blaspheme Japanese culture. For example, the blasphemy against the samurai at Namba-dera Temple has not been corrected. Hosokawa Fujita Kakyo's infiltration technique against a Buddhist statue. Even though it is a
So this Buddhist statue that he's referring to is one that I believe was destroyed in a fire. I believe that's the one that was either destroyed in a fire or something catastrophic happened to that statue. And its placement in this time period is wrong. I believe that's the going explanation. I'm not a Japanese historian. I do not profess to be anything of that type at all. Okay. I am just a hobbyist and I enjoy reading about their history and about their culture. I am in no way a doctoral expert or anything to be considered a resource on this stuff, okay? I'm merely speaking from what I understand from the books I've read. That's all, okay?
Buddhist statue, he makes two examples. Here, the blasphemy against the unrenovated Kokuho Ginkakuji Temple and the Koya Sana Tokoba have not been corrected. In the end, I can't help but feel that the slightly conspicuous parts, the parts that I pointed out on YouTube, have been corrected a little at a time.
He's right. He's absolutely right. They have responded to this.
What's even more serious is that with the Asakura issue, they want to free
Again, not talking about a tree, talking about Assassin's Creed.
ride on Japanese history and portray black people as heroes. The passion of the politicians is already on the level of a religion. It would be fine if this was just a game, a fantasy, a simple story, but to add an explanation like this as if it were real is already malicious.
Bingo. Bringing on Thomas Lockley onto that podcast.
Some people point out that this is blackwashing. Blackwashing is the opposite of whitewashing.
So funny to hear him say that. It's so funny.
Whitewashing means forcing white people into the roles of non-white people in a story, but on the other hand, if you deliberately bring in black people as samurai in this Japanese history and bow to them.
Yeah, well,
So, this is really connected to this malicious desecration of Japanese language, and as has been feared for a long time, there is a very strong possibility
when he says language, the Google is not getting it right. The Google Translate, it means culture. He's talking about culture, heritage, that kind of thing. For some reason, it blends all of that together. He goes on to explain more about how this is inappropriate and things like that. So I'm just, because again, the auto translate skews things so hard. So it's hilarious to me when I hear him say black goo washingu. It's black goo washingu. It's so funny. I gotta get a sound clip of that. But he's right. We see this with the guys that were doing the characters that were like Deku and the characters from Dan to Dan. Yeah, I think I have that. Dan, yeah. That were race swapped to be more African in their appearance, or just flat out race swapping them to an African appearance. And again, the Japanese understand this to be improper. They don't like this because this is their culture, this is their people. They don't have any crisscross with this. They don't have this problem in their culture. When they create characters who are black, they create characters who are black. When they create characters who are white, they create characters who are white. When they create characters who are Japanese, they are Japanese. Over here, we get very uppity about who gets to be where and do what in the plot line, who's most important, and how often the women are talking about the man, and which guy got talked down to by that other guy. So it loses any type of momentum and potence to it, which again, look what happened with Assassin's Creed Shadows, because check it out. We have the numbers right here. So back here in March, right? Back here in March, we have Analia Analytics. I'm choosing to read it that way. So this is Analia Analytics, okay? Nice girl. Analia Analytics, nice girl. Anyway, we have this website here that's tabulating these sales figures. Now, they're following the PlayStation figures, and we'll get into a Reddit post that breaks this down. I know, dreaded Reddit, but this one's pretty accurate because they did the math on these release numbers that Ubisoft didn't want to disclose during their earnings call a couple days ago. Here we go. So, March's PlayStation top 10 had Assassin's Creed at 1.2 million sales, okay? Now, why that's important is because they go on to try and explain what exactly happened with Assassin's Creed Shadows here. They say, we'd like to note that though Assassin's Creed Shadows is no disaster, nor is it a smash hit, it's selling okay. We expect a long tail for the game, with an eventual Switch 2 release. I'm not quite sure how that's going to change anything for them, but we should point out that way back up here at the top, they mentioned something very important. It says, ironically, Ubisoft's heavy discounts pushed its most significant launch in years, Assassin's Creed Shadows, out of the top 10. It was Steam's top 11 game, it's like number 11 game, with copies sold in March selling only 367,000 copies. Okay, so just think about that for just a minute. So because Ubisoft put all these discounts on their previous games that weren't so DEI centric, guess what? Those games, having not been hamstrung by those types of things I was talking about just a few minutes ago, all those cultural hiccups, right? All that culture police stuff. All these games that weren't victim of those types of standards, well, they outsold Assassin's Creed Shadows. Whoops. Don't you hate that when you step in your own dookie like that? That's gotta suck. Now, we're going to go over here to April, because April's important because, boom, look at that. 368,000 copies on the PlayStation by itself, okay? That's horrific, all right? Now, imagine you're in Ubisoft and you're like, okay, that 1.2 million on March, that's fine, that's okay. We're good. What happened was Monster Hunter Wilds ate our lunch, but once people get Monster Hunter out of their veins, they'll come around for Assassin's Creed Shadows, surely. Right, guys? Right? No, they didn't. No, it would appear that the people took advantage of Ubisoft having it on the Ubisoft launcher, right? Available to people who had prepaid to play those games on that launcher, which, by the way, if your free trial expires in the time frame that you have Assassin's Creed Shadows on your game, you can't uninstall it. You have to pay Ubisoft money to reactivate your Ubisoft launcher to uninstall Assassin's Creed Shadows off of your device. That's right. Yep. Thanks, Kata. Kata brought that up for us. He went through that. That's great. They're just extorting money out of you now. Like, you want this piece of trash off your computer? You're going to have to pay us first. So they're going to get you coming and going. They're going to get you coming and going. Speaking of coming and going, here are the numbers that we're going to talk about now. This is Assassin's Creed Shadows sales numbers, and it's way worse than you think. According to the F Ubisoft, now I'd say the whole word, but we're here on YouTube. We got to keep it family friendly. So it says F Ubisoft, the subreddit, and this is by user OKMarketing9544. I believe that's just an auto-generated name. I can't imagine that being something somebody actually chose. Either way, this person has wrote out a pretty extensive explanation about what's going on here. So we're going to go line for line with it. So get your chicken tendies, get your popcorn, get your drink, and get comfortable. 2 months ago, Ubisoft launched another quadruple A game, a title the CEO himself called Make or Break. And we recorded that. Spencer Bakuli, the editor-in-chief at Bounding Into Comics, had this to say about, reported on this. It says, if the game performs moderately, we're really in trouble. And that's how deep they are in this. So it didn't even perform moderately. It performed like mud. So here we are. Within days, Ubisoft proudly announced 3 million players, or 3 billion if you count the Ubisoft Plus glorified DRM posting as a game launcher. Ubishills celebrated, declaring their god's greatest gift to mankind and shattered all gaming records. It had shattered them all. Yet no one knew the actual sales numbers. Now, 2 months later, we finally have the numbers, and they're brutal. PS5 only saw 1.7 million copies sold since launch. That's 2 months, and only 1.7 million copies were sold of Assassin's Creed Shadows for the PS5. But now, let's jump over to the PC, and it's pretty bad. On the PC, only 367,000 copies were confirmed to be sold on Steam in the first 2 weeks, after which sales plummeted so hard it became difficult for game analytics to gather accurate data. Okay? Just try to picture that. Like a quadruple A game after 2 weeks of being a digital download, meaning you didn't have to go to the store, you didn't have to pop open the disc. It was just something you put on download on your Steam launcher, and you went and made a sandwich, and probably by the time you went for a jog or had a nap, it'd be ready to go. Remember the old dial-up days? Anyway, so it says right here, it says the Xbox, there were no exact numbers, but it's the worst performing among the 3 platforms. So let's be generous and assume it had the same sales as PC. Okay? That's very generous considering Xbox didn't even report numbers for Assassin's Creed Shadows. So here we go. That brings the total to 2.4 million copies across all platforms. Okay? Since it started. All right, that's 2 months, and only 2.4 million copies have been sold for this quadruple A game that was heralded as Ubisoft's return to form. Remember that one? Return to form. Everybody's returning to form. Turning to a garbage form. We have Ghost of Tsushima, I said it right that time, sold about as many copies in just 3 days, and it was a PlayStation exclusive, meaning it didn't have the advantage of the PC and the Xbox to also contribute, and Steam to add to that, okay? The reason why I set separate from PC and Steam is because not everybody will go and get that. They'll have it like on the Ubisoft launcher on their PC, right? Not the Steam launcher. And that's why I separated the two, okay? That's all. I don't know anything you don't know. Even Assassin's Creed 1, a game from 18 years ago, sold 2.5 million copies in its first month. Ubisoft will post their earnings again in a few hours. We saw that already. It's terrible. What do you think they're going to tell their investors? And they wouldn't talk about it. That's the thing. They wouldn't talk about what happened with the Assassin's Creed Shadow sales. They insisted there were 2 million players, and that was fantastic. Well, again, people who log into the game, play it for 10 minutes, and then never open it back up again probably aren't the demographic you want to attract to your property, your quadruple A game. Remember, fellas, it seems to be pretty important to, I don't know, make sure that the game is, selling, right? Kind of important. So if we think about this for just a minute, and there was only, uh, excuse me, what was the grand total here? Yeah, 2.4 million copies sold across all those platforms, right? Number was so small, it's escaped my head. So imagine this, right? You are Ubisoft, you have put close to $500 million into the development of this game. I promise you, there's no less than $400 million went into this production. Promise you. Especially with all the callbacks to The Office to polish everything, and the game's still not got its parkour system correct. All right, you see that recently? They came out and made sure that everybody knew that. Oh, by the way, we're still updoodling. We're still updoodling the parkour system. So, irregardless of all of this, it's 2.4 million copies sold. That's it for Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Shadows. We now know through tabulation and a little bit of generous number giving to the Xbox that that's where we're at. 18 years ago, the very first Assassin's Creed, when it wasn't even a name on people's tongues, they'd never heard of such a concept even, sold 2.5 million copies. It's really hard to rectify just what the hell is going on with Ubisoft to sit there and lie about this, rather than owning up to it and admitting that this chase for the modern audience returned absolutely nothing. But I don't know, guys. You'll have to let me know what you think down in the comments below. And as always, good luck out there.